Streaming now, this is the Wood TV Live Desk.
And good afternoon, everyone. Phil Penarski here with the Wood TV Live Desk. Hope you're all having a fantastic start to your Wednesday, as he does every Wednesday. We are being joined by Digital Reporter Matt Jaworowski, and he's going to be talking about not one, but two of his stories from this past week that have gotten a lot of attention online. They've been very fascinating to check out. Matt, we really appreciate you coming on. First things first, though, we want to talk about your Sunday story, which really dealt with something that we talked about on the live desk last month as well during Earth Week, and that is about saving the bees. This one taking a little bit of a different approach, kind of trying to dispel some old tales of how dangerous bees can be, and really just trying to fix all of that. So if you wouldn't mind, Matt, just kind of going in a little bit in depth into that story again for those who maybe haven't gotten the chance to check it out yet.
Yeah, so piggybacking off of the Earth Day series that we did, I got a lot of questions of, obviously we want to help the bee population, honeybee specifically, but how do we differentiate them from other pests? Or my kids are afraid of bees, how do I teach them to not be afraid of them? And so that kind of got me going down this road, and I had a really interesting conversation with a horticulture specialist out of the MSU Extension, Dr. David Lowenstein. And so he was really able to walk me through the differences between what are bees and the difference between bees and wasps. So truthfully, the bees around Michigan rarely sting. They're really not a creature you need to be afraid of. And even most wasps, there are roughly 100,000 different species worldwide. Most of them don't, they have the capability to sting, but they rarely do. There are only a select few particularly aggressive species, and so that's what we walked through in this story, the three different species that you should actually be on the lookout for, and how to differentiate them from bees. And
what are some of those major characteristics to kind of help people identify them? I know the horticulture expert was a really great tool in that story of providing a lot of information, and also kind of dispelling a lot of those old beliefs that I know for growing up I was scared of bees, but kind of realizing now that it's not really the bees you need to be worried about.
Right. So the big takeaway, first let me say this. The term wasp is a bit of a catch-all term. So you think of bugs like hornets or yellow jackets, those kind of things, all those bugs are technically in the wasp family. So really we're talking about bees and wasps. The one difference, especially one that you can kind of catch with your eye as they're flying around, is hair or fuzz. Bees are going to be fuzzy, and they use that more because that's how they help collect pollen. So that's kind of one of your main giveaways. If you see the bug and it's fuzzy or hairy looking, it's very likely a bee. So you shouldn't have to worry too much. Really, bees, David put it this way, you really have to go out of your way. You have to really try to get stung by a bee. Basically, you have to, whether you're swatting at it or interfering directly with their hive. Outside of that, a bee's very likely not going to sting you. Wasps, however, are more sleek-bodied and shiny. So that's kind of how you could tell the difference there. He mentioned that there are three species specifically across Michigan that are really the most aggressive, things that you might see in your parks or in your yard, that kind of thing. And the easiest way to identify those is actually if you can find their nest, which is not something you want to mess with. The three creatures are the bald-faced hornet, the eastern yellow jacket, and the paper wasp. Now we have all these different details laid out in our story online. Basically, yellow jackets are opportunistic nesters. Typically, those are the ones you'll see in the ground, so they can be dangerous where if you might not notice that there's a hive in your yard or near that path where you're walking. So really, as long as you're staying away from it, you should be fine. The bald-faced hornet, they make those big papier-mâché-looking nests up in trees, look like a big football almost. And David even said, even with those nests, you don't want to mess with them. They're extremely difficult to get down. If they're far enough, high enough up in the tree, he says really not to worry about it. As long as you're not climbing that tree, you should probably be okay. Paper wasps, they build those little honeycomb nests. They're not very big. They usually only hold anywhere between 10 to 50 wasps at one time. And he said those are generally okay, where you could just take a broom to them and knock it down. Those wasps are actually more likely to fly away than actually try to attack you. They may try to rebuild that nest, but they're not as aggressive. He said of the three, that's the nest he's most comfortable taking down himself.
Right. And, again, you did talk to David Lowenstein with the horticulture educator at MSU. And, just hearing from him, could you really provide, did he say anything, kind of talking about how he thinks separating them and letting people know the differences between these different insects, does he believe that could really play a strong role in helping the honeybee?
I think it all plays a part. He says, obviously it's important to be able to tell the difference because we want to make a point of differentiating the bee, and maybe that the bad rap that bees get as these stinging pests, when really we know they're so influential, not only just in our ecosystems, but in our economy as well. The $20 billion value that they bring each year to helping pollinate our crops, and just how the role that they play in our ecosystem. So if we can help, change the image of the bee as a pest or something to be afraid of, he thinks that can go a long way in that fight.
Absolutely, and I do encourage everybody to check that story out. If you're watching us on Facebook, you can find it in the description box and in the comment section below. But there's also another link there. It goes to one of Matt's other stories from earlier this week, and it is a very fascinating one. Perfect timing with the coronation of King Charles happening over the weekend. Matt, could you tell us a little bit about your story about the last king of Michigan, James Jesse Strang?
Right, yeah, the story, it's something that I've known about for a while now. James Jesse Strang, which the entire time writing that piece was constantly fighting the urge to write Jesse James Strang. James Jesse Strang. It's a story it's fairly popular up in northern Michigan because that's where he ruled. He's unofficially the United States' last king. He was some historians will call him a con man, but he also had ties to the Mormon Church. We know that he was born in New York, and he was a lawyer and worked as a postmaster, and I believe he published his own newspaper. But there are a lot of pieces of information out there that suggest he had more nefarious methods as well. There's one particularly cited source that claims that Strang sold a plot of land in Ohio, which he did not have any, it was not his property. There's no means to sell them, and when the man who bought the property confronted him in New York, Strang faked his death and fled west. And that's how he came to the Mormon Church. He ended up moving to Wisconsin. He came down to this city called Nauvoo, Illinois, which at the time was this really budding community. Historians say it was kind of at the time, in the mid-1800s, rivaling Chicago for this kind of bustling, up-and-coming city in Illinois. But it was also a major hub for, at that time, the Mormon Church. So right at that time, Strang, who was previously an atheist, converts to Mormonism, or converts to that belief, and is quickly named an elder in that church. He makes pretty fast friends. Joseph Smith is assassinated or martyred, and after that, Strang comes forward. He claims that he has this handwritten letter from Joseph Smith declaring him his successor. And so between that letter and a series of other incidents, Strang built his own following, and while most of the Brigham Young and the other elders of the church moved west to Salt Lake City, he moved to Beaver Island, Michigan. He claimed he had visions, and he received this other set of plates, which is an important incident or part of the Mormon belief, where he said that the plates told him that he's supposed to be declared king, and so he became known as King James I.
And it's just such an interesting story. Not only just having a king, in quotation marks here in the U.S., but also just how he rose to power. Matt, you went into it in incredible detail in your story, and we don't want to give too much away. We want people to go out and read that story. But just briefly, kind of just tell us what ended up happening with James Jesse Strang.
So when Strang and his group of followers, the Strangites, moved up into the island, they kind of established their own city up there. Kind of made their own way. They kind of took over a lot of fishing lanes and shipping business, which really upset members of the community already up there. They kind of basically came in and took over. But more importantly, because Strang has such a strong and large following, anywhere between hundreds into thousands of people, depending on the time, he exerted that control. He basically had his own voting bloc. So he was actually elected to the State House of Representatives twice. He served 2 terms. And then a lot of his other followers took local government positions, county positions. So that really gave him a lot of authority in the area and kind of insulated him from certain criminal charges. One of the nuggets in the story is that then President Millard Fillmore actually kind of asked the district attorney, like, hey, we need to take care of this guy. We need to figure out a way to remove him from power. And so there were some trumped up charges. I know he was supposed to be charged with murder and treason. He ended up facing a series of charges that Strang was able to beat. So that kind of, in a way, almost cemented his power with his followers. And he had a good run. He was up in Beaver Island for about 10 years before he was eventually assassinated by some of his disaffected followers. Every good story must come to an end. His came to the end in 1856, which you can read about in the story.
Yes, no, definitely a bizarre story. And Matt, before we go, did want to ask, though, with a story this complicated and with so many moving parts, was there anything that maybe you couldn't add into the story that you really wanted to, or that you found pretty interesting?
Yeah, there was the fact that there were enough detailed accounts of what actually happened in his assassination. A lot of the historians rely on newspaper clippings from the time. The Northern Islander, which is kind of like the first really consistent newspaper from that region at the time, which was founded by Strang and his followers. So even still today, that newspaper still has ties to them. But even in that time, they provided a pretty detailed description of his assassination, who the players were, what had happened, that kind of stuff. Long story short, there were a couple incidents that led some of his followers to plot to take him down. He was lured basically toward a steamer, a boat that came to harbor, and he was attacked on the pier. He was shot 3 times. He didn't have died. He died about a month later. He didn't survive his initial wounds, eventually succumbing to them. But the fact that they were Strang's own newspaper, the people that, his own followers, they still went, the full journalistic degree of making sure we're detailing this incident, even though it was extremely personal to them.
Yes, no, very bizarre story indeed. I do encourage everybody, if you haven't gotten the chance to check it out yet, please do so. You can find it right now on woodtv.com. Matt, as always, thank you for coming on the live desk today, and we will see you next Wednesday.
Anytime, thank you.
And I want to thank everybody else for tuning into this latest edition of the Wood TV Live Desk. I'm Phil Penarski, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.